what we're doing is the ethics and values, Jewish ethics and values at war, but we took a detour as the 17th of Tammuz and the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av, came up. We talked about that, which had an overlay into the ethics and values of war. We went through Sefer Malachim Bet, the last chapter of how everything fell apart at the time of Nebuchadnezzar and Babylonia, and then we went into the Gemara. We did Talmud, and we ran into Tisha B'Av, then we ran into Tu B'Av, the 15th of Av. And I'm going to very, very quickly run through a little bit of what we left off with 2 weeks ago, and then finish up with Tu B'Av, the 15th of Av. And by next week, we'll be back to Rambam and everything, but continuing from where we left off. So thanks so much for being here, and let's get right into the material. Okay, here we go. In Masechet Ta'anit, 30b, Daf Lamed Amud Bet, about the 15th of Av. We've moved on from Tisha B'Av. So we're actually at the end of, towards the later part of class, going to wrap up Tisha B'Av too. We were in the middle of Tisha B'Av, then the following week is Tu B'Av. So I had to decide, do I finish Tisha B'Av? And then we end up not having learned material before Tu B'Av, so I jumped a little bit out and we're back in. Okay, it'll all be back on a normal schedule by next week. Here we go. Finishing on Tu B'Av, to remind you. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel had said, Lo hayu yamim tovim liYisrael k'chamisha asar b'av. Now, chamisha is 5, asar is 10. The way Hebrew works, 5 and 10 is 15. In Hebrew, usually, every Hebrew letter has a numerical value. It's called gematria, other things. So like the letter Aleph is assigned the number, is like the number 1. Bet is 2. It would be like in English, if you would say the letter A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, J is 10, Z or Z is 26. It would be like taking a word, cat, and then say, let's see, the letter C is 3, and the letter A, first letter, is 1, that's 4, and the letter T is probably 20-something. And then say, okay, so the word has the following total number value, and that's equal to another word whose letters are different but add up to the same. And sometimes they learn things out of it that way. So every Hebrew letter has a numerical value. To write the word 15, you would write Yud, which is 10, and Hey, which is 5. And it would be called Yaba'av, Yud Hey. The only thing is we are not allowed to write Yud Hey, because Yud Hey is one of the names of God. Oh boy. So what did the rabbis do? They said, you're not allowed to write 10 plus 5. You're allowed to write 10 plus 5, but you're not allowed to write Yud Hey together. That's one of the ways we pray to God. So instead they made it 9-6. Tet is 9, Vav is 6. So 2, also Tu B'Shvat, which comes out around January, February, 15th of Shvat. So that's how that became 2. You also have this with one or two other ways, like the number on a Shulchan Aruch. The Code of Jewish Law has many chapters. Like a secular code of law has what they call titles or chapters. In Shulchan Aruch, it's called a parak, a chapter. So when you get to chapter 275, the Hebrew letter for 200 is Resh, the Hebrew letter for 70 is Ayin, and the Hebrew letter for 5 is Hey, Resh, Ayin, Hey. But it happens to be that letters Resh, Ayin, Hey spell out Ra'ah, wicked or evil. So they again turn the letters around so that they don't write Resh, Ayin, Hey in a Shulchan Aruch as a page number. And that's the thing. So that's where the 2 comes from. When it comes to Tisha B'Av, Tet B'Av, 9 of Av, you don't run into that. But as I said, with some of the Hebrew names, you run into that. By the way, that's the reason people donate $18 or something like that for Chai. The letter Chet is 8. The letter Yud is 10. Chet Yud, the word Chai, life, happens to equal 18, 8 and 10. So people donate in multiples of 10. I'm pledging 5 times Chai, here's $90. or here's $72, 4 times chai. I had a Rebbe in 7th grade. He said it's a shame that the rabbis early on did not teach people when they're donating to shul, instead of to donate in multiples of life, they should donate in multiples of death. Says, Mavis, he says, now that's a donation. Mem is 40, Vav is 6 is 46, Tav is 400, 446. Imagine a guy donating 3 times mavet to the shul. He says, what shul would not rather get 3 times mavet than 6 times chai? So that's all the stuff you need to know about Hebrew letters, numbers, and ways to make a buck, and accounting things. Okay. So we were learning about Tu B'Av, and we were learning that Rab Shimon ben Gamliel says it's the happiest day of Judaism, side by side with Yom Kippur. We went into that 2 weeks ago, so I'm not going to go into all of why, because we did that then. We're just catching up on where we left off. Okay. So there's no days like that. And up to the time of the Talmud, 5 different wonderful things had happened in different years on Tu B'Av. And we're just going to refresh our memory without going into the whole learning that I did last time. Chamisha Asar B'Av Maihi, why 15th of Av? What makes that so special? Rav Yehuda Mar Shmuel, Rabbi Yehuda said, in the name of the rabbi known as Shmuel, there was a rabbi who was considered so great, and he was not referred to as Rabbi Shmuel. He simply was known as Shmuel. He was the chief rabbi of one of the most important Torah centers in Babylonia, Neher Da'ah. Yom Shehutru Shvatim Lavoza Buza. As we learned 2 weeks ago, it was the day, here the decision had been made that tribes were not allowed to marry into each other. It all stemmed from those daughters of Tzalafchad. He had died without leaving a son, so the girls inherited his property, but therefore it was ruled that the girls could not marry husbands from other tribes, because that would then mean that the land from Tzalafchad's tribe would get intermingled with the tribal land of another tribe, and it became a thing you're not allowed to marry out of the tribe. Now, of course, that doesn't exist, but in those days, Jews only lived with Jews. There were no non-Jews. It wasn't like you're living in America or somewhere where there's a lot of non-Jews to intermarry, God forbid. But in those times, it was only Jews, but God's plan was for the tribes to be separate, and the fear that the lands would become commingled, led the rabbis to rule that not allowed to marry out of your tribe. And 1 year on a Tu B'Av, 15th of Av, it was ruled, we're allowing it from now on. So that's a big thing. And the second thing was reminding you, Yom Shehutar B'Shevet Binyamin Lavo B'Kahal. We had learned that there was that big thing about the tribe of Benjamin, and it almost got wiped out of the Jewish people. The other tribes went to war to wipe them, eradicate them from the Jews. And over the course of time, and at that time, without having completely wiped them all out, but pretty much just about wiped them all out, all the tribes pledged that none of us here today will allow any of our sons to marry any of the surviving women of Benjamin. The men basically been wiped out, and we're not going to let them marry into Benjamin, or we're not going to give our daughters to Benjamin men. Lo yitain bito leBinyamin. We're not going to give any of our daughters to any of the few remaining Benjamin men, since children are the tribe of their father. If Benjamin men don't procreate, that ends the tribe of Benjamin. If Benjamin daughters would have children with non-Benjamin sons and daughters, those children would be associated with the tribe of the father. That's why if your father's Kohen, you're a Kohen. If your father's a Levi, you're a Levi. If your father's not, you're a so-called Yisrael, meaning you're from one of the other tribes, most probably Binyamin or Yehuda. So they had taken upon themselves, none of us will give a daughter to any of the remaining surviving Benjaminites. And it was on a Tu B'Av at a later year that that decree was terminated. And once again, it was allowed to marry into the tribe of Benjamin, so that those remaining men could have children who would become tribe of Benjamin. It's the reason that Benjamin was so much smaller a tribe than all the other tribes. And it's also the reason God chose, one of the reasons God chose the first king of Israel to be from Benjamin, to establish that that tribe has legitimacy, validity in the Jewish people. and we learned more about it at the time. So that's the second thing that happened on one of the 15th of Avs. A third one was, that was the day Shekalu Bo Mete Midbar. We learned it was on that day that the Jews were certain that in the desert, no more Jews are dying in the desert. As we explained in much greater detail, there were 603,550 men, call it 600,000, of fighting age 20 and up, who had wept the night of the 9th of Av when the evil Meraglim came back with their bad report after spying the land. God said, this 9th of Av, you wept unnecessarily, so this will be a night of weeping in the future. And all those of this generation, all the men of this generation, God said, will die in the desert and not make it to Israel. The curse did not apply to the women. They who did not die of old age did make it into the land of Israel. It applied only to men and did not apply to their children under 20, only to men of fighting age 20 and up. And so actually 20 to 60, but those over 60 died anyway of old age over the next 40 years, pretty much. So every year we learned that they would dig graves on Tisha B'Av, and everybody would lie in the grave that night. You'll recall we learned it 2 weeks ago. And then when they got up the next morning, they would find every year 15,000 people did not get out of the grave. Every year on Tisha B'Av, 15,000 died. And if you do the math, 40 years, 15,000 a year, it's 600,000. So basically they all died. The sin was on Tisha B'Av. The punishment was that Tisha B'Av would be a day of weeping. So every year, 15,000 of the people who were cursed not to make it through the desert into the land of Israel would die on Tisha B'Av. Then the final year, when they came out of the grave, the next morning, they looked for the 15,000 this year who died, and they found no one died. Everybody came out of the grave. And they tried to figure it out, and they came up with the decision. It must be, since it's happened every year for the last 40 years, it must be that we got our dates wrong. They didn't work off a calendar, a computer, a smartphone. They worked off the moon, and they would count the days of the month based on the moon, etc. And they determined we must have been off by a day or two. Probably, unfortunately, it'll be tomorrow night that the 15,000 will die. And so they kept the graves, and they went in the graves the following night, and the following night, 3, 4 nights, 5 nights, nobody died. And then on the 15th of Av, as we said 2 weeks ago, and they looked in the sky and they saw a full moon. And as we explained, the new moon is the most thin of the slivers, like a banana. And as the month goes on, it gets thicker and bigger and wider until in the middle of the month on the 15th, it's a full moon. And then it gets smaller and smaller so that by the end of the month, it's back to being like a thin banana again. Well, they saw in the sky, it was a full moon, the 15th of Av, surely. And that means nobody did die this year on Tisha B'Av. It became a big celebration on the 15th of Av. That was the day they were able to confirm no one had died. And then there were 2 more things about the 15th of Av. This one we did. Ula Amar Yom Shabitel Hoshea ben Ela Prostayot Shehoshiv Yeravam ben Avad Al Hadrachim Shelo Ya'alu Yisrael Regel. As we said, at the time of the split of the civil war that resulted in 2 separate countries, the northern kingdom with capital in Samaria, Shomron, known as the country of Israel, the southern kingdom with capital in Jerusalem, known as the country of Yehuda or Judea. Jerusalem and the Beit HaMikdash was in the southern kingdom, so the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom, despite having broken off and remaining at war, people would go on pilgrimages to the Beit HaMikdash. And the founder of the split, like the Jefferson Davis of that time, Davis was not nearly on any level evil the way that Yeravam ben Nevat was. I'm not saying that Jefferson Davis was righteous, but Yeravam ben Nevat he was biblical evil. And Yeravam ben Nevat announced, we're not any longer going to allow people from the north to cross over the border into Yerushalayim to be at the Beit HaMikdash on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Consequently, it was just a horrible spiritual thing. People demanded some kind of spiritual alternative, and we're going to learn about it when we get to the books of Kings, 2 Kings, Melachim Bet. What he did, just horrible. Anyway, it was 1 year on the 15th of Av, of all days of the year, that a subsequent king, who also was evil, nevertheless put out the word, I'm having the sentries step down. We're tearing down our Berlin Wall, and we're letting people cross the boundary into Jerusalem for the Beit HaMikdash. Then they got to come back. So that was a fourth great thing that happened on that day. And one more thing, and then we'll go on from that. Rav Manta, we didn't do this, and there's this new material. Yom Shenitnu Harugei Betar L'Gvura. Maybe you've heard of Betar. Betar nowadays is one of the so-called Jewish settlements in occupied territory. Actually, it's a Jewish community in the eastern suburb of Jerusalem. The whole world says that Israel has no right to be there, that it's Arab, Palestinian. There's no such thing as Palestine. It's Israel. There's no such thing as Palestinians. Those are Arabs. And the world says, no, it belongs to the Arabs and eastern Jerusalem and all the suburbs, and it all has to be given to the Arabs as a country. And it's not going to happen. Although the entire world, and when Kamala Harris gets up even in America and says there's got to be a two-state solution, and the Palestinians, there's no such thing as Palestinians, they're Arabs, have to have self-determination in their own country, two-state solution. It's never going to happen. But what she's actually saying, because Baruch Hashem, she doesn't know what she's talking about. I'm not saying that as an insult. I'm just saying a fact. She doesn't know what she's talking about. If she knew what she's talking about, she would understand. She's actually saying that Israel should give up East Jerusalem. Baruch Hashem, she's not really saying that because she doesn't know what's going on. And we remember this from when she said she had studied the maps in southern Gaza, and it will be impossible for Israel to evacuate 1 million Arabs from Rafiah. And then it turned out Israel was able to do it in 2 days. Because Baruch Hashem, she doesn't know what she's talking about. She has no clue. Even when she goes to be interviewed, they have to send a babysitter with her. So anyway, Betar, which is part of eastern Jerusalem, was a fortress like Masada. And when the Romans were on their last round of wiping the Jews out of Israel, although there always remained a Jewish presence for 2,000 years in Yavne and other parts up north, it would be mistaken to think there ever was a time, even after the Roman destruction, that Jews were gone from Israel. Jews always were in Israel. They only were driven out of Jerusalem and were based instead in Yavne and places in the Galil for a period. Anyway, as the Romans were destroying, they had destroyed the Beit HaMikdash and exiled the Jews from Yerushalayim, basically, more or less, in the year 70. And then survivors fled to Masada, and Masada fell in 73. But even then, not all the Jews were knocked out. And there was a large contingent of Jews who found other places in Israel to continue, and they lived under the Romans another 60 years. Much of the Gemara and the Mishnah take place after the fall of the Beit HaMikdash. We're learning in the Talmud about how we mourn the Beit HaMikdash. So if they're in Israel and Babylonia, okay, so they're outside of Israel, but if there are also rabbis in Israel opining on how we mourn the second Beit HaMikdash, tells you there were still Jews in Israel. And Betar was a fortress like Masada. It was a mountain. And when it fell, that was the last great resistance to the Romans. And they were led by Shimon Bar Koziba. Rabbi Akiva renamed him Bar Kochba. It's a long story. Rabbi Akiva and his students were there fighting alongside him. And it was horrible. Hundreds of thousands of Jews were massacred. Horrible. When the Romans destroyed Betar, when Betar fell, the Romans, to rub it in further, had the bodies of the hundreds of thousands, had their bodies laid around, like set in a circle around Yerushalayim, and bodies piled on bodies piled on bodies, practically creating a wall of human flesh. Think of those pictures you've seen from the Nazi Germans in World War II, where they piled dead bodies in the camps. And the Roman theory was, the intention was to further break the morale of any Jews left behind. They're going to see what happens to those who fight the Romans. Either they get crucified, and that breaks morale, or they're going to leave these bodies, and the bodies are going to be left to rot. The smell of dead, rotting flesh, and the bugs and the flies and the decomposition of those bodies, and people will see it every day. And the Romans won't allow anyone to move the bodies, and the bodies are going to be all around Jerusalem. And it will destroy, the Jews will never again rise up against us as they did in 70 and Masada 73 and Betar 132 to 135. They'll never do it again. And the bodies did not decompose. There was no bad smell. There were no bugs, no flies. In the heat of August, and going on all year, day after day, week after week, month after month, the bodies were fresh. And instead of it breaking the morale of the Jews perceived this is God's miracle. That what God is saying is that for his reasons that we cannot fathom, he allowed Jerusalem to fall and the second Jewish commonwealth in Israel to fall. For his reasons. But he signaled us, I have not abandoned the Jewish people, not even in exile. I am with you and I still do miracles for you. And these bodies will not rot and they will not decompose. And this went on for a year until the Romans began to realize that it was accomplishing just the opposite. It was re-inspiring and reinvigorating the Jews' faith and their determination to stand up to Romans and all of that. So it was on the 15th of Av that the Romans finally gave the word, let's bury all the bodies. This is counterproductive. We don't want them looking at these they're not healthy, they're dead, but we don't want them seeing these fresh bodies anymore. Rav Matna Amar, Yom Shenitnu Harugei Betar Likvura. The 15th of Av is the day that the Romans allowed those who were killed at Betar finally to be buried. Elsewhere, V'yomar Rav Matna Oto Yom Shenitnu Harugei Betar Likvura. And Rabbi Matna taught additionally, I'll bet you didn't know this, unless you did. Rav Matna taught additionally, because on that day, when the Romans put out the word, we are ordering and commanding that those bodies now be buried promptly. Tiknu b'Yavna, the remaining Jewish population and community in Israel, located up north in Yavna, that's where the sages continued to be, they issued a takana, they issued a rabbinic decree. Until that day of Tu B'Av under the Romans, until that day, when people would eat a meal with bread and they would recite Birkhat Hamazon, the benching, the word bench in Yiddish means bless, means bracha. To bench is to bless, to recite a blessing. The benching always ended, Uvenei Yerushalayim Kodesh Meher B'Yameinu Baruch Hashem Bonei Barach Hamav Yerushalayim. There was no amen at the end. Baruch Hashem Bonei Barach Hamav Yerushalayim. Period. End of it. No harachamans. No. For those of you that know what I'm talking about, it would take too much time to explain it to the rest of us. I'm trying my best to make it understandable to everybody. There were 3 blessings at the end of eating any meal with bread. If you eat a big, gigantic meal, but there's no bread, even though it's full and satisfying, and it's $600 at the best restaurant with 9 bottles of wine, but if there's no bread, you do not recite the benching, the Birkhat Hamazon. Instead, you recite the Mayan Shlosh. There's a different, much, much shorter after blessing that's recited. If you've eaten certain of the grains of Israel, or olives, or grapes, or wine and things. And then there's another 1-sentence bracha if you've had other things, water, juice, whatever. Okay. But the main blessing when you've eaten bread consisted of 3 long blessings. Hazan et hakol, the way it starts, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam hazan et haolam kulo b'tovo b'achen, and it ends Baruch Atah Hashem hazan et hakol. Then there's the second one, No delecha Hashem Elokeinu al, and it goes on, and it ends, and it goes to V'al hakol. That's why the paragraph V'al hakol starts with the letter Vav, meaning and. It continues the previous paragraph. And, so there's a paragraph, No delecha, doesn't start with and it continues V'al hakol Hashem. It starts with and, because it's continuing, and it ends Al ha'aret Baruch Hashem, Al ha'aretz V'al hamazon. And that's the second bracha. And then comes the third bracha. Rachem na Hashem Elokeinu Yisrael Amecha, V'al Yerushalayim Yerecha V'al Tzip. And it goes on. And at the end of that paragraph, it goes to the next one, Uvenei, and that's why Uvenei start not B'nei, but Uvenei, again with a Vav. That's it. And also, so the two paragraphs, the long one and the short one connect, and it ends with the bracha, Baruch Hashem, Bonei, Barachamav, Yerushalayim. And there were three brachas, that was it. And if it's Shabbat, then you add, it would say, V'hachlit Seinu Hashem Elokeinu. And if it's Yom Tov, you add Yala V'yavo. And it all gets added in the third bracha, Rachem Hashem Elokeinu Al Yisrael Amecha V'al Yerushalayim Yerecha. It gets added to that bracha because that's the bracha for the Beit HaMikdash. V'al Yerushalayim Yerecha V'al Tziyam Mishkan Kavadach V'al Malchut Beit David Mashiach. So it's for Jerusalem and for the Beit HaMikdash. And so at the Beit HaMikdash, they offered sacrifices, a special sacrifice on Shabbat. Uviyom HaShabbat Shnei Kvasim B'nei Shana Tamimim. And a special sacrifice on Rosh Chodesh, and a special sacrifice for each of the festivals, and a special sacrifice for Rosh Hashanah. And that's why that those Yala V'yavos and that would say V'achlit Seinu are added particularly in the third bracha, the one would say Rachem na Hashem Elokeinu Yisrael Amecha. And for the same reason, that's why the Al Hanisims for Chanukah and Purim are added in the No Delecha, because that's the one for general thanks. Okay. But that's where the bunching ended. The Gemara says, according to Rav Matna, Oto Yom Shenitnu Harogei Betar L'Gvura, on that same day, already celebratory, the 15th of Av, that they commanded now bury all the people around the walls of Jerusalem. Tiknu b'Yavne, the rabbis, the sages in Yavne said, we are adding permanently for all time to come a fourth bracha in the benching. Hatov v'hametiv. Hu hetiv, hu metiv, hu yetiv lanu, hu gmalanu, hu gomlenu, hu gmalenu la'ad, l'chenu l'chesed, etc., etc. That bracha, which means God is good and he continues being good. Hatov shelo hisrichu. That bracha was written with a thinking that God is good, that their bodies did not rot and decompose. V'hametiv, and he continued being good, that ultimately he brought for them proper burial. And that's what we're going to learn about Tu B'Av, and we just learned a lot about benching also. And that's a lot of what I do with these classes. If something comes up that is not just in any old segue, but a pertinent segue, it's a tremendous opportunity to learn things that become important in your everyday life. Every time you bench for the rest of your life that you had bread, you now know why you have that fourth bracha. Most, I would say, 99% of Orthodox Jews who bench regularly, religiously, don't even know this. And now you do. And by the way, footnote before we go forward, that's why there's that word, it's curious, Amen. Uvenei Yerushalayim HaKadosh Baruch Baruch Atah Hashem Bonei Barachamav Yerushalayim. Amen. So what's that all about? Who, when you say a bracha, you don't answer Amen to your own bracha. The word, again, if you don't have background, bracha means blessing. And when you recite a blessing, it's considered arrogant to say Amen to your own blessing. You say Amen to someone else's blessing. What's that? Baruch Hashem Bonei Barachamav Yerushalayim. Amen. How do you say a bracha? Amen to your own bracha. Well, what's going on there? The next time you actually read from the benching, take a close look, no matter who published it. It could be Art Scroll, it could be Koren, it could be any of 1,000 different publishers. There's a period in that bracha, Bonei Barachamav Yerushalayim, period. And then Amen. Amen is not part of that bracha. The bracha ends with Yerushalayim. The guy who wrote the, I'm not making a joke here, the guy who wrote the melody made a mistake. You see that? You write a melody and people sing a melody and they don't think about it. Baruch atah Hashem, bonei brachamav Yerushalayim, amen. That's wrong. I'm always very careful. Bonei brachamav Yerushalayim. And I pause. Amen. So what's that amen? Well, at least it's not a bracha, answer to that bracha. The rabbis put that in there to separate the first three brachas from the fourth one. When they instituted the fourth bracha, they wanted to distinguish the first bracha, according to our tradition of benching, was written by Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, on the occasion of the man coming down from heaven. He instituted that we're going to say an after bracha from now on, whenever we eat, a single bracha, hazanat hakol, because of the miracle of the bread. Yehoshua, Joshua, who brought us into the land of Israel, added a second bracha to the benching. From now on, when you eat bread, you'll say Moshe's bracha, and you'll add no delecha Hashem Elokeinu al Yisrael, no delecha Hashem Elokeinu, for giving us the land of Israel. Eretz tova urachava, a good and wide, broad land. For that blessing of the land, Yoshua added a second bracha. We all say it, even if you don't live in the land of Israel. And then the third bracha was added by David, whom we're learning about Tuesday nights. He added the bracha, Rachem no Hashem Elokeinu Yisrael Amecha v'Yishmerecha Mecha, a blessing for Jerusalem, because that was his place. And his son Shlomo appended extra wording on it, and for the house of David, and for the Beit HaMikdash. B'al Yerushalayim Yirecha, b'al Tzis Kol Mishkan Kvodecha, b'al Malchut Beit David Mishichecha, b'al Habayit HaGadol v'HaKadosh, shenikra Shimcha Alav. So the addition of, and please, God have mercy on the household, the family, the household of David, and on the holy building called in your name, that was by Shlomo. The rabbis of the Talmud felt we're not on the level of Moses, Joshua, David, and Shlomo. So we need to create a partition between their brachas and our post-biblical bracha. So they put in the word amen. And that's how that all happened. Let's go back. So as we continue, one more part on our study of Tu B'Av. So we're in Masechet Ta'anit, the laws of fasting, but as you know, the Talmud segues. As that's the way we learn. That's what I do. And the segueing is purposeful. While we're learning this, let's learn that, and it will be easier to remember both in the future because they link together. So anyway, Ta'anit is about fasting, but while we're learning about the 9th of Av, let's also learn about the 15th of Av. And so the last part of Masechet Ta'anit that we're going to learn, closing our study as well of Tu B'Av, Shebahen Benot Yerushalayim. The Mishnah, we're not going to pull up the Mishnah now. As you know, the Gemara comments on the Mishnah by also quoting from the Mishnah, so you know which part of the Mishnah they're commenting on. So the Mishnah describes what used to go on Tu B'Av. It became known as marrying day. The day, we'll learn the text in the Gemara. It is associated with marrying. I even told you those 2 classes ago about how J-date, I don't know if they still do it, but in the days that after my divorce, before I met Ellen, I was on J-date, and the 15th of Av was a freebie. You're always allowed, again, I don't know what they do nowadays, but in those days, you're always allowed to kind of go through the profiles, but you're not allowed to actually contact someone. If you want to contact, you have to buy coins or a membership or whatever. And on the 15th of Av, they, one day a year, that J-date made it free. Anybody with memberships, without memberships, could contact unlimited numbers of profiles. And I told you more about it at the time. So 15th of Av, I also told you today, it's a nice day to go out on a date, preferably with your spouse. It's Denise and I took Denise out for something special on Tu B'Av. It's a nice thing to do. Shebahen Benot Yisrael. Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis taught, all the women who are not married would go out into certain public parks that were known to be the places to go on Tu B'Av. Let's say in New York, I don't know if it's safe to walk there even in the daytime anymore, but Central Park or different parks in different parts of cities, etc., like a major park. In Irvine, it would be what they call the Great Park. And everybody would know. You didn't need emails and you didn't need text messages. Everybody knew. Today, if you're looking for a bride, or if you're a bride looking for a single guy, you go to this park, to this public field on the 15th of Av, and people will be there. Everybody, even the daughter of the king, even the princess of the land, would go. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. But, and now the thing is, what are they going to wear? After all, you want to look your best. If you're trying to have a guy take a look at you, it's sort of like nowadays, from what I understand. I haven't done this modern. The last time I looked at an online dating was J-Date after my divorce. Ellen, all those 20 years, I didn't have any occasion to look at it. And then I knew Denise from our shul, so I never really had to look at that or anything again. But you read newspaper articles, and I understand there's something with swiping now that I guess you take a look at the face, and if you like it, you swipe one side. You don't like it, you swipe. I don't know exactly how it works. But that kind of a system obviously places a tremendous amount of on faces. And if faces are what make a good wife, why is it that Angelina Jolie cannot hold a husband, or Jennifer Lopez? Every time you pick up the paper, Jennifer Lopez is getting divorced from someone else. And then the guy misses her so much that he goes back to marry her again. And then he remembers why he got divorced the first time. And the same thing with all of them. All these beautiful, Elizabeth Taylor. The thing I would say nowadays, at least she had the morality that she would get married 5 times. Nowadays, the only reason you don't have Elizabeth Taylors nowadays is they don't bother getting married. They just publicly live together. So at least she got married. But I mean, if faces alone determine who's going to be a good wife or a good husband, nobody has as high a divorce rate as Hollywood. You know who doesn't get divorced in Hollywood? The bit part actors. The guys like J.K. Simmons, the guy who played Fred in the Lucy Desi Arnaz movie. Those guys stay married, I think. Charlton Heston. Well, who's going to divorce Charlton Heston? Moses, God knows what kind of curse he'll put on him. But the thing is that on Tu B'Av, the system was you're looking at faces, body shapes, and what they're wearing. You want to wear your nicest clothes. So it's a problem. So it's an interesting thing we're going to learn in the Gemara now. Really, the princess is going to have the nicest garments, the highest established people, highest up on the economic totem pole, and those who are more poor, they're not going to look as nice, at least externally. Gemara is interesting. This is the context of what we're about to read now. So what happened? On the Tu B'Av, Bat Melech sho'elet mi Bat Kohen Gadol. Rather than the prince wearing stuff from her own wardrobe, she had to go down a notch. She would go to the daughter of the high Kohen and borrow something from her. Bat Kohen Gadol mi Bat Skan. The daughter of the high Kohen would borrow a dress from the assistant, a notch down Kohen. Ubat Skan mi Bat Meshuach Melchama. And the daughter of the assistant Kohen, to the high Kohen, would borrow a dress from the daughter of the Kohen who was appointed to lead people in battle. We've learned about the Kohen anointed to lead people in battle. Ubat Meshuach Milchama, and the daughter of the Kohen who was anointed to lead people in battle, like the fourth ranking Kohen, Mibat Kohen Hedyot. She would borrow from the daughter of any old Kohen or any young Kohen. And Kohens would borrow from each other. V'chol Yisrael, Shoalin Zamiza. And all the other Jews that weren't from the tribe of Kohen, Levi, would borrow one from another. Kedei shelo yitbayesh et misha en lo. So that no female, no girl, no woman would be embarrassed on Tu B'Av that she doesn't have what to wear. It goes into something else, I'll skip that. Benot Yisrael yotzaot v'cholot bakramim. Now that they all have their dresses, all the girls of Israel, the ladies, would go out and dance in the vineyards, in those public parks. Tona. And it was taught, Misha ein lo isha nifneh l'sham. And it was taught that any Jewish male who was single also was supposed to go and look and check out what's there. And the women, while they were dancing, would call out to the men and say things like the following. Miyuchasot shebahen hayu amrot, the women who were highly placed, daughters of rich people maybe, or high status people. So those people, the highly placed, would say, Bachor, so Tanur Rabbanan, Yefefeyot shebahen, those who were most pretty of face, they would say, Mahayu amrot, what would they say? Tenu einechem layofi. Fellas, focus on how pretty we are. Focus on the prettiest among us. Focus on me. Focus on pretty. She'en ha'isha ela liyofi. Now, in those days, women were not doctors, lawyers, accountants, IT professionals, investment managers, secretaries, homemakers, all kinds of things. In those days, women basically would get married, have children, and take care of the home. So focus your eyes on beauty, because the purpose of a woman is beauty. If you have beauty, you'll have beautiful kids. So that's what the beautiful ones would yell. All the Jennifer Anistons and J-Los and Angelinas. Now, those who were connected politically or financially, the daughters of rich fathers and families, politically powerful, Mahayom wrote, what would they say? Tenu einechem lemishpacha. Your eyes should focus on the families that we women come from. You should look at, don't look at the women that from lesser, look at the women from better families. I'm from a better family. Look at me. Lefisha en ha'isha el levanim. Because the whole purpose of a woman is not beauty. Maybe I'm not beautiful, but I'll give you children, and if we're established, we'll be able to rear them properly and set them up in business. And the women who are neither outstandingly beautiful nor outstandingly well connected, what would they say? Fellas, pick a wife with the intention of fulfilling God's will. Don't worry about the most beautiful, the best connected. Just do what you know, and God will watch out for you, and God will direct you to a good woman. The only thing is, be sure to adorn us with gold. Omar Ula. From this discussion, and by the way, it is so true. I'm a rabbi of over 40 years. I am a rabbi of over 40 years. I got to tell you, people confide in me. They know I'm not going to share with others what they tell me. And also, I'm an attorney of 16, 20 years. So I've got double confidentiality, and people trust me. And they need sometimes to get something off their chests, male and female. And I'm telling you, people who marry only for looks, sometimes they're lucky. Really, sometimes they're lucky, but after 5, 10 years, and then after 20, 30 years, if you don't have something in common, I got to tell you, and people who marry for families, I will share with you, I did not marry for family. I didn't marry for family. I didn't marry for looks. I wanted a wife that I thought would look nice and to me, and I didn't care about the family because I came from a very modest family. My father worked for his brother. He had to work 6 days a week from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Came home 8 p.m. exhausted, had to be back at work every day except for Sunday. My mother was a homemaker, and we were financially lower middle class. My parents owned a house in a modest neighborhood. Mom used to beg every year for scholarships for my 3 sisters and me to go to Yeshiva. And we didn't walk around with rags, but we knew we didn't have what other kids had. And so, I'm fine. And so when I got married, I wasn't looking for family. I was just looking for someone who shared my values. As I've told you in the past, I hope I've got the right class. I told the Tuesday class, I was very active in the Jewish Defense League. And I had been arrested 13 times at demonstrations for Soviet Jewry. And I was looking for someone committed to the cause that I was committed. I wanted a wife that would get arrested with me. That was my wish list. And she did, several times. I'll never forget one time, we were outside the Soviet Union's mission to the UN, let my people go, freedom now. We didn't say bring them home. We said let them out. And I remember I got arrested for doing certain things, and they brought me into the 19th precinct lockup. By then I already knew exactly which part of the room was more comfortable with the air conditioning. And this time, Officer Matthew Mullen, I still remember, he said to me, wipe that smile off your face, buddy, because I'll call your wife. How would you like it if I call your wife and tell her that her husband's has been arrested? I said, you don't have to call her. She's sitting right over here. So that was my first marriage. And what destroyed that marriage was the family, that I had married someone whose family was very upper middle class. And they looked down on me, and they looked down on my mother, and they looked down on us financially. And I have told people ever since, don't marry if you're not wealthy. Don't marry into wealth if you can avoid it. Be self-made. When I married Ellen, she was self-made like me. Her father worked in the back of the post office. When you go to the post office to pick up an envelope, he's the guy in the back room who gives you the envelope. That's what he did. And Mom was a substitute elementary school teacher. And when Ellen and I went out that first date, and we fell in love with each other in the first date, it's like we know who we are. We know where we come from, and we're both self-made to the degree we have anything. And I've had it with people who expect to be. So this is important, this tu b'av stuff. I suspect most of us in the room, not all of us, many of us are married. Maybe you have children who some point are married or are thinking of getting married. These are important values from a rabbi to teach from the Gemara, that what matters is that God will bless people. You marry for the right reason, and you have a much better chance of having great happiness. And when you look back 10, 20, 30 years later, and you see people and how often we say, oh, we thought they were such a good couple. What happened? Very often, people who have married outside their financial realm, or have sometimes a not good looking person marries a very good looking person. There's always those, if you Google it, there's always like 10 couples that don't make sense. And you'll try to see what doesn't make sense. And this one, Aristotle Onassis and Jackie Onassis. And yet when you think about it, it makes perfect sense. And so it's important to focus. And when you are married, if you're thinking, well, Rav, Baruch Hashem, I am married, remember every day, focus every day of your life on how blessed you are to have the spouse you have. And tell your husband or wife, I love you. I love you. And once in a while, because when you just say every day, I love you, hun, that's Fargo. Love you, hun. If you really want to do it the right way, once in a while to say to a husband or a wife, I love you because. I love you because you prepare my medicine for me every day. You sit 1 hour a day counting out 20 tablets for me in the morning. It's not the only reason. I didn't know that would happen when I married you. But when I think of what you do for me every day to prepare 20 pieces of medicine, I'd be dead by now. I love you for that also. And another day, I have to have other reasons too. If the only reason I love her for is because she counts out, I would have married a pharmacist. But the thing is that to say, I love that you're kind, that you don't yell at me, even though I don't deserve to be yelled at. I love that you're this. I love that you have a sense of humor. And whatever your thing is, I love you so much for what it is. And when you don't have to say it every day, when you say it once in a while, that itself makes all the difference in a marriage. Not simply throwing out the garbage, but that helps too. Let's go back to the Gemara. So in talking about Tu B'Av and marriage, they would say, don't look at beauty. The women who are less beautiful and not well attached, don't look at beauty. Don't look at families. Just purchase for the sake of heaven, and just make sure you give us a lot of golden jewelry. Okay. And now the Gemara basically, in its last paragraph, and this is a sign that the Gemara is ending, and the way the Gemara always segues from segue to segue to segue. Well, while we're talking about putting crowns of gold on the heads of these wives, Omar Ula Bira, Omar Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi taught, Atira Kadosh Baruch Hu lasot machol tzadikim. Here, while we're talking about the women dancing, at the end of life in this world, righteous souls will go to the world to come, Olam Haba, paradise, Gan Eden. And tzadikim, the righteous, will dance. They'll be dancing in heaven. V'hu yoshev b'neihem b'Gan Eden. And God will be sitting amidst, so to speak. Obviously, God has no shape, no form. He'll be sitting amidst the righteous in Gan Eden, in paradise. V'kol echad v'yechad mar ebi. It goes on and on, that every single one of them will be able to point to God with his finger. They'll be that close. When you point to somebody with something, they're close. Otherwise, you wouldn't point. And that's what it'll be in Olam Haba. So with this, I was going to also, but it'll take us long and it'll take us far afield from where we've been. So we'll leave this, God willing, for next year if Mashiach has not come. I was going to teach you the Gemara about Kamtza and Bar Kamtza and some other Tisha B'Av material, but we'll leave that, God willing, for next year. Again, with God's help, Mashiach will come. The mosque will be gone from the Temple Mount, and the Beit HaMikdash will be there, and we no longer will have to learn Gittin other than whatever. And instead, we'll finish with a psalm. And that'll kind of bring to an end this side thing of 3 weeks about Tisha B'Av and Yerushalayim. We had begun this 3-week segue because of the calendar. We had begun with the psalm, the Tehillah that we recite whenever we bench. You now know what bench means. On a weekday, on a non-Yom Tov, a non-holiday, or non-Shabbat. On a regular day, we begin with Psalm 137, which is what we studied at the very, very beginning of the last 3-week segue, as the Jews were being driven into exile from Eretz Israel toward Babylonia. They al naharat Bavel sham yoshavnu gam bachinu b'zachrenu et Zion. There by the rivers of Babylon, we sat and wept as we remembered Zion. And it went on and on. The Babylonians are saying mockingly, sing us some of your songs of Jerusalem. And the psalmists were saying, how can we sing songs of Jerusalem in exile? We play the lyre, L-Y-R-E, with our right hand. If I forget you, Jerusalem, may my right hand lose its ability. We sing with our tongue. If I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my tongue forget her ability. Im eshkachei Yerushalayim tishkach yimini, tidbak l'shoni l'chikim lo eskarechi. Im lo a'ale Yerushalayim arosh simchati, if I do not extol Jerusalem above my greatest joy. On Shabbat and Yom Tov instead, when we bench at the end of a bread meal, we begin with Shir Hamalot B'shuv Hashem et Shivat Zion Hayinu Kecholmim Ahazimale Secho Pinu Uleshonenu Rina. So what is that? What are we singing? And with this we close tonight. Shir Hamalot, a song of the, some translate it as pilgrims. But the key word here is Oleh, Ayin Lamed, those going up. No matter where it is that you're coming from when you go to Israel, you're making aliyah, you're going up. Although topographically, you may be higher than Israel on a higher mountain, when you go to Israel, you're going up. Shir Hamalot, a song of those going up to Israel. The 137 was the people leaving Israel going down to Babylonia. This is a psalm going up to Israel. B'shuv Hashem et Shivat Zion, when the time will come. So in other words, they're not yet back in Israel. Perhaps they're in Babylonia. We don't know where exactly they were as they were writing this, but it's the song of those aspiring to ascend to Israel when God will return us, Shivat Zion, to the return to Zion. Hayinu kecholmim, we will be like people, it'll be like a dream. It's like you open your eyes and it's not what you were dreaming. It'll be like, you can't believe it, we've got to open our eyes, are we back in Israel? That's what's happening today. Every Jew, when we talk about, three fronts and Hezbollah, Hamas, the Arabs in Judea, Samaria, Hayinu kecholmim, it's a dream to be in a position where Jewish might, weapons, and with the help of God, can wipe them out, country to country. Az imales chokpinu, when that day comes, do we come to Israel? Our mouths will be filled with smiling and laughter. Uleshonenu rina, and our tongues will be singing with joy. At that point, Az yomer v'gayim, at that point, the Goyim, the non-Jewish world, will say, not to say to us, like in Psalm 137, hey, Jews, why don't you sing some songs about Jerusalem? Rather, when we go back to Israel, the Goyim, the nations of the world, will be saying, Hidil Hashem lasotem eleh. Oh my gosh, God has done such great things for them. The Lord has done great things for them. Good translation. Gadol. Yes, indeed. Higdil Hashem lasodimanu. Yes, indeed. God indeed will have done great things for us. Hayinu smeichim, and we will be sameach, happy as can be. Therefore, shuva Hashem et shvitenu. Therefore, God, please speed it up, and please return us, we of exile. Please return us, ka'afikim ba'negev, like fire hoses, the way the water comes out of fire hoses, like hoses in the dry desert of the deep south Negev. Imagine how, if you shot fire hoses or water courses, whatever, in the Negev, it would just shoot. I mean, wow, that open field and shoot us, bring us in our multitudes. And as we think of what we're going through now in exile, they would be saying before the return, those who in Babylonia have to plant seeds and are weeping and crying, Dima is tears, Zorea is to plant, to sow, S-E-W, S-O-W. Those who are planting with tears, Barina Yiktsoru, will end up harvesting and cutting their grown crop with joy. In other words, now it's not good, but if we keep the faith, at the end, it's all going to blossom and bloom. Haloch yelechu vacho, though a person walks and goes crying, No say Mesha Chazara, carrying bags of seeds. There's nothing to eat. You can't eat the seeds, really. And you're schlepping heavy bags of seeds, and you're going to be planting. Bo Yavoverina. But later on, after going through what you go through, you will be coming back with joy, no say alumotav, carrying the sheaves. And that's what that's a dream. And of course, it's Shabbos and Yom Tov. That's the one we sing then. And you know what? We're living a dream. And with that, we'll close tonight. But it's very important. It's always easy, right? You get stopped in the street. Hi, how you feeling today? I got a sore throat. Nobody says, how am I feeling today? My vision is perfect. I'm breathing pretty well. I still have my hair. I can hear, especially with these new hearing aids. And I'm able to raise my arms, and my rotator cuff is better than the pitcher on the Yankees. And I can walk, and I can. No, the response is, how am I feeling today? I have a sore throat. The whole focus is on that one negative thing. That's human nature. That's human nature. As Jews reading the news, that's how the news is. What's the one bad thing we can say? Oh God, they just nominated this guy. Everybody go and find something bad on him. They nominated Vance. Let's see which schmutz we can find on Vance. They nominated Walsh. I mean, my politics is my politics. But the truth is, this guy, Schlemiel, was the governor of Minnesota. Nobody bothered him. Now he's going to be vice president. Let's find out what a liar and a cheat he is. Now that nobody cared whether Emhoff had an affair with any nannies, now that she's no longer vice president, but she's going to be president, let's find out what schmutz we can find on Emhoff. Let's find out what schmutz we can find on Trump. That's the world we live in. That's not how a Jew should see things. We should see things positively. We have to be aware and realize what's bad. And if they have to be killed in Gaza and in Judea, Samaria, and in Hezbollah in Lebanon, you have to do what you have to do. But the big thing is, Hayinu Kachomim. It's really a dream to be alive today. My grandparents never would have dreamt it. They wouldn't even have dared to dream it, that there would be an independent, sovereign Jewish state with the capital of Jerusalem. Unbelievable. So I'll see you, God willing, Sunday for that class, Tuesday for that class, Thursday for that class. Have a wonderful week and Shabbat Shalom. Bye-bye.